So, in the last episode of the playthrough for T-Pose Am Jesus Christ, um, it was there was an event at the wedding at Cana, however it's pronounced, um, which is described in John chapter 2, the Gospel of John chapter 2. So, anyway, I decided to look more into this further because I think a lot of I think that there's some secrecy in this event, the way it's written. Um, a lot of it, the debate about it usually centers around whether Jesus was married or not. And it really seems like that there are some arguments to be made about that. I think I recently went back and forth with Microsoft Copilot about that issue, and Copilot really wanted to stick to the Christian and academic consensus that Jesus was not married, and I had to call it out on some of its points, and it had to concede on some of the things that I called it out on. But I'll probably go over that material at another time, maybe in the form of a published book, um, which would not be just about whether Jesus was married or not, because I don't consider Jesus all that important to someone who's serving the deity of the Bible. And I certainly don't consider the wedding at Cana all that important to such a person. But I think it is revealing when exposing how the Roman Flavians were involved in the invention of this Christian myth about Jesus, which is really just a mask, a literary mask for Titus Flavius. So, anyway, going back to the text, it says, "On the third day there was a marriage at Cana in Galilee, and the mother of Jesus was there." Interesting, the choice of third day there. Jesus also was invited to the marriage with his disciples. That's interesting wording there. By the way, in the game T-Pose Am Jesus Christ, I don't yet have any disciples. I'm not sure if there were a couple that showed up, but they certainly weren't following me to the wedding. And I don't have any of my 12 disciples so far in the game. So this is, I think, a case where the chronology is a little bit mixed up. Or it might even be possible that there were no 12 disciples at all. Because here we got the wedding at Cana in as early as John chapter 2, and he's already got all his disciples, or at least enough of them that it could say with his disciples. Anyway, then in verse 3, when the wine failed, the mother of Jesus said to him, "They have no wine." And Jesus said to her, O woman, what have you to do with me? My hour has not yet come. This is all very curious language here. It's like, what's Mary doing? Is she like smirking that the wedding already has no wine? Or it says when the wine failed, did the wine maybe go bad? Um but anyway, so she's remarking about it uh to her son Jesus, for she chooses him out of, she has other sons, I believe. And Jesus says to her, O woman, what have you to do with me? My hour has not yet come. Really strange language. I mean, it might be more easily explained by some Christian commentaries or something, but these are not. This is one of the most shocking things that Jesus seems to say to his mother. It doesn't seem very respectful. It doesn't seem like he's honoring his mother, yet she understands what he says, so that she says to the servants, so somehow now she's bossing the servants around at the wedding? Like she's running the thing? Although it said that, I don't know, in T-Pose Am Jesus Christ, Mary is already at the wedding. So she says to the servants, do whatever he tells you. Uh, so why is it up? Is it because Mary's running this wedding that she might then resort to depending on Jesus to fix the problem? Like, is she the wedding planner? Um, like, well, why is it Jesus's responsibility to fix it? Now, you might say, well, it's a community banding together, but I mean, there's a cost associated with this wine, right? So, and you've got to procure enough of it that it's going to satisfy all of the attendees. So, Jesus has that kind of money? Or has he turned water into wine before so that Mary knows that she can depend on Jesus to do it again for this event? It's just all very curious. So, now you could turn to some Christian commentaries, being that this is Christian literature, and maybe get some explanations for this, but I'm not going to waste my time with that, because I don't believe that, like, frankly, that Christians have a clue about their own scriptures. Rather than the way the Christian Gospels portray it, that Jews have no clue about their own scriptures, I think it's far more the case that Christians have no clue about their own scriptures. So, anyway, and then you've even got some of them discouraging other Christians from even studying the Bible because it might kill their faith. Well, if there's something in those scriptures that if they study it, it's going to kill their faith, maybe their faith in Christianity should die. So, so it says, now 6 stone jars were standing there for the Jewish rites of, and they were for the Jewish rites of purification, each holding 20 or 30 gallons. Now, isn't there a Christian band called Jars of Clay? Jars of Clay is a Christian alternative rock band from Nashville, Tennessee. The members met at Greenville College in Greenville, Illinois. So far it's not explaining the name. So the name comes from 2 Corinthians 4:7, referring to the idea of storing spiritual treasure within fragile human jars of clay. So here's a Christian explanation that jars may actually refer to human bodies. In Judaism, are jars or pots ever? Of course, you've got bottles too in Christianity, referring to people. Jars or pots or bottles ever used to symbolize human bodies or people. Yes, in Jewish tradition and biblical imagery, jars, pots, and vessels, specifically earthen vessels or clay pots, are frequently used to symbolize human bodies, frailties, and people, highlighting the concept of fragility versus divine content. These vessels represent humanity's delicate mortal nature compared to the strength of the divine spirit. The potter and clay, the prophet Isaiah, and later Paul in Romans chapter 9, verse 21, uses the metaphor of the potter and the clay to illustrate God's sovereignty over human creation, where people are seen as vessels shaped by God. Treasure in clay jars, the metaphor of treasure in jars of clay. 2 Corinthians 4:7 emphasizes that the spiritual strength within humanity comes from God, not from the fragile human body itself. Ritual purity in first century Jewish law, stone jars were used for purification rituals because they were believed to be resistant to impurity, in contrast to porous clay pots, which, so that's stone jars, in contrast to porous clay pots, which could become impure, serving as a metaphor for spiritual cleanliness. 6 stone water pots. The 6 stone jars at the wedding in Cana are interpreted as symbolizing human imperfection, 6 being one less than the perfect 7. But it's also the day of creation that man was created, right? These symbols appear extensively in the Hebrew Bible, particularly within prophetic literature, as a way to illustrate the relationship between God and humanity. Oh, and then it also says, standing nearby were 6 stone water jars. Standing nearby? Now, 6 stone jars were standing there. So that's kind of interesting language for jars. Of course, if each one was holding 20 or 30 gallons, that's kind of a tall jar, right? So maybe you might say that for a jar of that size, but the word standing is usually packed with meaning especially in the Dead Sea Scrolls, I think, where it talks about the standing one, actually, I think it's Robert Eisenman translates it as the standing one, but typically in Scripture, in the so-called Old Testament and the so-called New Testament, or translations thereof, I believe that the word is usually translated upright, the upright one, not necessarily the standing one, but it makes sense, that he would be standing, especially if you've ever spent any time in a Jewish synagogue. Um, there's a lot of standing that goes on, and a person who a person who stands a lot as opposed to someone who is sitting or reclining a lot, their core strength is a lot better than a person who spends most of their religious services sitting. So, so yeah, in Judaism, it's a good thing to be an upright one or a standing one. So then he says, fill the jars with water, and they filled them to the brim. Was there a point during the siege of the temple in Jerusalem by Titus's legions that the temple's defenders were thirsty for water? Yes, the defenders of the temple in Jerusalem in 70 CE suffered from severe dehydration and hunger. By April 70 CE, Titus established a tight blockade around the city, and the destruction of local water supplies and cisterns caused critical water shortages, contributing to a desperate situation where people were forced to drink from the sewage system and scavenge for scraps. Yeah, the conditions of the siege of Jerusalem and the temple were really horrific. So this Titus's blockade, specifically designed to coincide with Passover, trapped pilgrims. So, mind you, these Roman Flavians understood the significance of Passover and were cynical enough to take advantage of it, so that uh, Titus's legions could wait until pilgrims from all over were just jam-packed within the walls of Jerusalem, and they could then lay siege to Jerusalem and not let any of them get out. So trapped pilgrims rapidly depleting water and food supplies. Archaeology suggests the Romans aimed to destroy rather than capture local water sources and infrastructure. As the siege dragged on towards August, hunger, thirst, and disease, rather than just combat, weakened the defenders to the point of collapse, as discussed in the EBSCO research starter. Okay, so I'm looking at this as a recounting of the siege of the temple. It's happening in the Gospel of John, or the Gospel typically attributed to John. Mary is mentioned. Mary is already at the wedding. And I've discussed how I believe that Mary, the Virgin Mary, the mother of Jesus, is a symbol of the temple. I don't think she's a real person. But I'll even question that theory in within this passage, in case I'm wrong, right? So, because I admit it is just a theory. I mean, there's a whole lot of literary evidence for it, but I wasn't there, so I can't say for certain. Um, so he says, fill the jars with water, and they filled them up to the brim. He said to them, now draw some out and take it to the steward of the feast. So they took it. So now these 6 stone jars, and again, stone, there's a word play there where stone can also refer to a sun, S-O-N, a sun. So now draw some out seems to, I'm thinking of the stabbing of these 6 stone jars, or these 6 people. Because it doesn't say that he did any mumbo jumbo or abracadabra or anything. It doesn't even explicitly say that he transformed the water into wine here. It just goes from fill the jars with water, they filled them to the brim, and then he says, now draw some out and take it to the steward of the feast, or the captain of the feast. Here it says, take it to the head waiter, Architriclinos. 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 The governor of the feast, or the ruler of the feast. So, I mean, could that refer to Titus during the siege of the temple, or could it refer to, was it John of Gischala? Who was the last defender of the temple in Jerusalem when Titus's legions laid siege to it? John of Gischala. So, while Eleazar ben Simon commanded the inner courts earlier in the siege, says John and his forces were the primary defenders holding the Temple Mount during the final stages, while Eleazar ben Simon commanded the inner courts earlier in the siege. John's troops continued to fight against Titus's Roman legions inside the temple compound until the structure was set on fire and destroyed, after which he was captured and sentenced to life, or sentenced to life imprisonment. And you gotta wonder why Titus is lenient on John of Gischala when he wasn't lenient on Simon ben Giora, or Simon bar Giora. Again, I don't know if I've mentioned this already. I think that Simon bar Giora, or Simon bar Giora, especially now that I know that this name Giora may refer to his being a son of a ger, a convert. I think that Simon bar Giora is dragged back to Rome because Simon bar Giora is the new Hebrew name of the Emperor Nero after he converted to Judaism. And I think that Flavius Josephus hints that some of these resistance leaders, Jewish resistance leaders, may have actually been Roman false flag operators. They may have actually been Romans who were leading, or if not Romans, then at the very least in the pocket of Rome, agents of Rome's plans against the temple. So I think it's possible that could be why Titus was lenient to John of Gischala, because he may have been an agent of Rome all along. Says that he dominated the Temple Mount and the southeastern hill, leading the resistance after Eleazar ben Simon's forces were weakened. Simon Bar Giora controlled the upper city in the west and was the other major leader, but John held the temple complex itself. The conflict, the Zealots, led by John of Gischala, burned food supplies, and fought to the end, even as the temple was taken by Roman legions. I mean, that act alone suggests that he was an agent of Rome. I mean, why would you do that? That's just stupidity. I think Josephus says that the reason they did that was so that the residents of Jerusalem would have no other recourse but to fight. But they could have lasted so much longer during the siege if they had the food and the water. But that would have been against Titus and his legions, against their interests. They would not have wanted a prolonged siege, as long as it already was. So, and then eventually John is captured. So let's see, we'll close that. So, and we can close this. So then, so they took some of some of what was drawn out from these stone jars. Now, we're to believe that it was wine. When the steward of the feast tasted the water, now become wine. So now it says, now become wine, and did not know where it came from, though the servants who had drawn the water knew. Tasted the water now become wine, and did not know where it came from, though the servants who had drawn the water knew. So this is suggesting that, or could be suggesting, that the Roman soldiers who stabbed the resistance fighters, causing some of their blood, or wine being a symbol of blood, causing some of their blood to leak out, they would have known where it came from, where these resistance fighters came from, like that they were maybe in the employ of Rome. You could say, well, why would they stab them if they knew they were in the employ of Rome? Because that was the part they were supposed to play, right? These resistance fighters were supposed to resist. They were the controlled opposition. These leaders may have attempted to save their own backsides at some point, like through the whole thing, Simon Bar Giora survived until the whole thing was over, and so did John of Gischala. So somehow these leaders apparently didn't get so thick into the combat that they lost their own lives. And then the steward of the feast tasted the water, now become wine. And then the steward of the feast called the bridegroom. Now notice the steward is not named, and the bridegroom is not named. Really strange. Now, now it doesn't say the stewardess of the feast, but is it possible the steward of the feast was was Mary? And then the bridegroom is not named. Anyway, so the steward of the feast said to him, I guess the bridegroom, every man serves the good wine first, and when men have drunk freely, then the poor wine, but you have kept the good wine until now. So, the poor wine. So that would be the blood of poor people. Every man serves the good wine first. So the tendency would be to spill the blood of elites first. But you have kept the good wine, the blood of the elites, until now. So Simon Bar Giora and John of Gischala lived until the end of the siege against Jerusalem. So the steward called the bridegroom and said this to him. So this would suggest that the bridegroom is Titus, which would be Jesus. This, the first of his signs. Then look, here it acts like the bridegroom did this, but in the very next verse it says, this, the first of his signs, Jesus did at Cana in Galilee. Okay, and that's where Jesus' military campaign began and manifested his glory, and his disciples believed in him. And that word disciples, that could as easily describe Titus's soldiers. Let me see. Does say that Titus Flavius's glory was first manifested somewhere in Galilee? Yes, in the Jewish War, Josephus describes the campaign in Galilee in 67 CE as the initial setting where Titus Flavius demonstrated the military competence and leadership that would lead to his future glory, particularly through his actions in the Galilean campaign. Initial command. While his father Vespasian commanded the entire campaign, Titus was instrumental in commanding forces in Galilee, such as the actions around the city of Gischala, where John of Gischala, I guess, would have been from, where he showed a mix of military force and strategic restraint. The siege of Tarichaea, Josephus highlights the specific successful action led by Titus at Tarichaea, I don't know how to pronounce it, near the Sea of Galilee in the fall of 67, where he commanded a cavalry charge and suppressed a major uprising. Rise in prominence. These actions in Galilee served as a prelude to his major achievement, the siege and destruction of Jerusalem in 70 CE, which ultimately solidified his reputation as a great Roman commander. Josephus's narrative as a court historian for the Flavian dynasty, that being Vespasian, Titus, and Domitian, who were emperors from, was it 69 AD to 96 AD, which coincides with the dating of the Gospels, taking the name Titus Flavius Josephus. Josephus presents Titus's early career in Galilee to justify his rapid rise to power, positioning him as a brave and destined leader. While the ultimate climax of his glory was the destruction of Jerusalem, the Galilee campaign serves as the launching point for his military reputation in Josephus's account. So it says this was the initial setting where Titus demonstrated the military competence and leadership that would lead to his future glory. Whereas in 2, this, the first of his signs, so this, the first of his signs, Jesus did at Cana in Galilee and manifested his glory, and his disciples believed in him. After this, he went down to Capernaum, or I think it's Capharnaum or something like this, with his mother and his brothers and his disciples, and there they stayed for a few days. So then Mary leaves the wedding with Jesus. Now, so now there's another possibility here. Now, I've already talked about how Mary possibly being a symbol of the temple, and the temple having feminine anatomy, that when Titus, a Gentile, enters the most holy place, or the Holy of Holies, or at least he pierces or cuts the veil of the inner anatomy, shall we say, of the temple, which I see to be a symbol of the temple's virginity, the temple's hymen, so that Titus, this Roman conqueror, he basically, apologies if this triggers anyone, but Titus, this Roman conqueror, he rapes the temple and takes her virginity. Then what is born from that? Well, when Titus emerges from that womb, the temple is then his mother, even though it's burned or burning, in the process of burning to the ground. Nevertheless, Mary becomes his mother, and then, at least retrospectively, I think we can look at that moment as the moment that Titus, in actual history, may have, at least according to the myth that they're spinning, may have been born as Jesus. Now, this happens in Judaism when a Gentile converts to Judaism. His teachers, the ones who teach him, become like his father and his mother, because when the Gentile converts to Judaism, he's like a baby. He's a baby in Judaism. Christians do the same thing. When when a pagan or a heathen converts to Christianity, they'll call them a baby Christian. So the same kind of language is used in Christianity. But I think I've seen it in Judaism too, where a Gentile who converts and takes upon him the 613 mitzvot or commandments of the Torah, they're just a baby in Judaism, and the ones who taught him are like his father and his mother. Assuming like there was a woman that had any role in the Gentiles' conversion to Judaism, or in teaching him a single thing, about Judaism. Because where else would he get that knowledge from? He wouldn't get it from a Gentile. So it's possible that this Mary was a living Mary, so that to this Mary, who was like his mother, maybe she was already Jewish or born Jewish, and to some degree she taught Titus something about Judaism, so that when he took on this new Hebrew name, whether through an authorized act by Jewish leaders or just self-dubbing that name onto him, then it's possible that there was this Jewish woman who taught him something about Judaism, so that she would be likened unto him as his mother. But then, at the same time, maybe she was his age, or near enough to his age, that he could have married her. And who knows but that Roman generals might have taken women to wife on their deployment, even though they had a Roman wife back at home, especially if that woman was taken as a slave, in which case the Roman owner could use her sexually. Would that give her the status of a wife? I don't know. But then that would explain verse 4. "O woman, what have you to do with me?" So, like, we're not like married yet. My hour has not yet come, so I haven't um I haven't gotten married to you. I'm not married to you yet. There's no ring on my finger. And then she says, "Do whatever he tells you." So instead of Mary being the one telling him what to do, he basically doesn't act like a cuck or a simp, and he says, so that she has to say, "Do whatever he tells you." But this language about for the Jewish rites of purification, now it says that regarding the wedding of Cana, that this passage seems to be written for Gentiles, because it has to explain the Jewish rites of purification, even though purification is something that's in the Torah, the written Torah. But here it's calling it Jewish rites, as if it's like something Jews just like concocted, or it was just like some tradition of theirs that isn't in the Bible, in the Hebrew Tanakh. Let's see. How many holding 20 or 30 gallons? Well, I'm sure humans don't hold that much water. The human body holds how many gallons of water? It's probably not going to be that many. It says 9 to 11 gallons for an average adult. Wow. Okay. Average adult female is 9 gallons. Average adult male is 10 to 11 gallons. So, how much would 20 gallons of water weigh in pounds? That would be 4 jerry cans. So about 200 pounds. In the United States, 20 gallons of water weighs approximately 166.8 pounds. 20 or 30 gallons. So that would be about, if we added another 10, that would be about another 8, another 80. So about 240 pounds. And I weigh like 280 or something like that. So by weight, that water represents an adult male easily. So, yeah. So let's see. So where was the Cana of the Gospel of John located? So it says that located in northern Israel, with scholars debating two primary sites: Kirbet Cana, um, north of Nazareth, and Kefir Cana, about 4 miles northeast of Nazareth. Can't talk today. I think it's because I've got a little bit of a toothache going on. Um, so yeah, that's that. So this isn't this isn't at at Jerusalem if we're thinking of Cana as a geographical location. And then here it shows how it's up here, but let me see. New Testament map. Let's see what we got here. I don't need early Rome. Ministry of Jesus, that'll do. Can I blow this up? No. So here's Gishala in the upper Galilee. Here's Cana down in the lower Galilee. And then yeah, there's a lot of the figures, a lot of the locations from the from the ministry of Jesus here, but then Judaism is apparently off the map to the south. Or Jerusalem is off the map to the south. What did I say? Judaism? So they've even got Magdala here. So then Jerusalem's all the way down here. And this is about where the other map was. So that's quite a distance. Cana is quite a distance away from Jerusalem. Yet, um, they are purifying themselves. For what purpose? To attend the temple, or for, I'm unclear on that, why they're doing that. So maybe if it's for cases of menstruation or something, um, or after sexual intercourse. So let's continue. So We can close this down. Oh, but there is something here. Here it says the name possibly derives from the Hebrew or Aramaic word for reeds. And this is supposed to be the first public miracle of Jesus, which would align with Titus's glory, military glory, which took place there. Let's see. Somewhere here it said that, here it is. Because of the consensus of modern scholarship, which is sometimes pure crap, is that the fourth gospel was addressed to a group of Jewish Christians, and very possibly a group living in Judea province, so it is unlikely that the evangelist would have mentioned a place that did not exist. There is a minority view that the gospel was written for a Gentile audience, and those who take this view assert that the description in the passage about the marriage at Cana of 6 stone water jars there for the Jewish rites of purification, in spite of reflecting good knowledge of the ritual washing habits among Jews at the time, is specifically for a Gentile audience who would not know the topography of the Holy Land. On this hypothesis, the name Cana might have some purely symbolic significance. Except that there were there were legions of Gentiles in the Holy Land conducting a military campaign through there. And Gentiles read about this military campaign, and also Flavius Josephus's Antiquities and the rest of the Wars of the Jews. All these different place names are mentioned in there, so I'm not sure that there's any weight to that argument at all. But it does say here that on this hypothesis, the name Cana might have some purely symbolic significance. So that made me think of the term in Hebrew that I thought I had heard somewhere, kana'im. So kana'im, or kana with one end, kana'im with two ends, or with one end, it doesn't really matter in Hebrew, refers to a Jewish term for zealots or fanatics derived from a Hebrew word for those zealous on behalf of God. Historically, this often refers to the ancient Zealots, a political party opposing Roman rule in Judea. It can also refer to modern ultra-Orthodox Zealots, or refer to the geographic region and mountain Har Kana'im near Arad in Israel. In Jewish history, the Kana'im were radical defenders of the law who strongly opposed Roman authority and Hellenism during the Second Temple period. Definition kanai, or kana'i, I guess, singular, or kana'im, plural, means a zealous person, often implying extreme uncompromising dedication. The Kana'im Valley, Bikat Kana'im, and Mount Kana'im, Har Kana'im, are located in the Judean desert near Arad. Okay, and then it links to an entry for Kana'i in Judaism and Wikipedia, and also Zealots, Hebrew, Kana'im at the Jewish Encyclopedia. So, here this word Kana, I mean, it's zealot. The word is zealot. So, and the zealots were supposed to be these Jewish resistance fighters fighting against Rome. So, Kana'im of the first century, zealotry, described by Josephus as one of the four sects of Judaism during his time, was a political movement in the first century Judaism, which sought to incite the people of Judea province to rebel against the Roman Empire and expel it from the Holy Land by force of arms, most notably during the First Jewish-Roman War. And didn't we already connect John of Gischala as the Zealot leader defending the temple complex against Titus and his legions? So now I've got this working theory that the Romans were trying to use their divide and conquer strategy by offering two extreme poles to tear the Jewish community in two. Whereas the Pharisees were the moderates who were trying to hold together the Jewish community. And that's why this Roman Flavian Christian myth comes out so loudly against the Pharisees, because they were opposing any attempts to hold the Jewish community together. Meanwhile, I believe that they set up this super extreme form of Judaism. It might have been the Zealots, it might have been Qumran or the Dead Sea Scrolls community, and then they also had the permissive, backslidden offering for those who would want to gravitate in that direction. And so by posing these super holy, super extreme, super dedicated, super devout Jews on the one hand, they would draw away those who tended towards like severity, I guess, in their Judaism, kind of like maybe the House of Shammai. And then on the other hand, you could pull away those who were less inclined to observance of the Torah. And then you could pit these two extremes against each other. Because it's far preferable to the Roman military if they can get their enemies to kill each other rather than expending some of your force doing it yourself. And even in, the Hebrew Tanakh, I think, and I believe in First Enoch, and I think maybe even the Book of Revelation, if I'm remembering correctly, it talks about how the enemies of God would set about killing each other. And that would be a sign of the Creator kind of foiling the plans of his enemies. So then here's the Jewish Encyclopedia entry on Zealots. And says, origin and meaning of the name. Most writers consider that the Zealots were a so-called fourth party founded by Judas the Galilean. This view is contradicted, however, by the fact that Hezekiah, the father of Judas the Galilean, had an organized band of so-called robbers, which made war against the Idumean Herod. That's in the Antiquities by Josephus. And also by the fact that the system of organized assassination practiced by the Zealots was in existence during the reign of Herod, if not long before. And this kind of goes along with, I believe that Josephus seems to, and this is assuming that Josephus really was a Jewish prisoner of war held in house arrest by the Roman Flavians, but who was, sponsored to write these histories, and not just a concocted figure ghost written by the Roman Flavian dynasty. I think some people doubt that Josephus even existed. Anyway, so Anyway, so Josephus, he seems to, from my reading, he seems to hint that these dagger men or zealots may have actually been Roman agents disguised as zealot Jews. And so that hint may carry over then into the first century, or rather around the 60s or 70s AD, when the Romans uh, come to Galilee to make war against the Jews. So I think there's a hint there that the Romans were playing both sides against the middle. Anyway, so you can read more about zealots here, but we've established that Cana could very easily be a reference to the zealots. So now, what about the stone jars, and they held 20 or 30 gallons, and fill the jars with water. Now draw some out, and then what was drawn out was supposed to be wine, but wine is a symbol of blood. So I ask, where does Josephus mention the amount of blood covering the temple floor during the siege by Titus and his legions? And Google AI, who I think has gotten much better, by the way. It used to turn out some real crap output, very unreliable. Lately, it's been really good. Josephus describes the immense output of blood covering the temple floor during the Roman siege of Jerusalem in his work, The Wars of the Jews, Book 6, Chapter 5, Section 1, some editions, Chapter 4. Key details of this account include the specific quote. Josephus wrote that the outer temple was all of it overflowed with blood, and that as it dawned, saw 8,500 dead there. So the outer temple was all of it overflowed with blood. Context of the slaughter. He further noted that the slaughter was so great that the ground did nowhere appear visible for the dead bodies that lay on it, but the soldiers went over heaps of those bodies as they ran upon such as fled from them. Extent of blood. Josephus commented that the scene was so horrific that the blood was larger in quantity than the fire that was burning the temple down, and those that were slain more in number than those that slew them. Quenching the fire. In a similar description regarding the city streets, he mentions that the blood ran down in such high volumes that the fire of many of the houses was quenched with these men's blood. Which, I mean, if that's real, that's crazy. So here we have a picture of the temple floor during that siege of the temple, just being overflowing with blood. So I also recall that there was a similar reference in the book of Revelation. The book of Revelation describes a high level of blood in Revelation 14:20, where it depicts blood flowing from a winepress as high as horses' bridles for a distance of 1,600 stadia, roughly 180 miles or 300 kilometers. This imagery represents the intense final judgment of God's enemies. Blood flows from a winepress trampled outside the city, symbolizing the wrath of God. Now, the thing is that the walls of Jerusalem, with all of those pilgrims there for Passover, it becomes like a wine press, each person being a grape. And then the Romans come in and they just start stomping on everybody, and the blood, the wine, just begins to flow. The depth. The blood is as high as a horse's bridle, representing immense, deep, and catastrophic bloodshed. The blood extends 1,600 stadia, a vast distance traditionally interpreted as representing the entire land of Israel, or a vast area of judgment. The verse is part of the final harvest and judgment of the wicked, often associated with the Battle of Armageddon and the return of Christ, which still hasn't happened yet, of course. Unless you understand that Titus is Jesus, in which case he fulfilled his own backdated prophecy when he approached Jerusalem with the legions. It says another similar but different scene occurs in Revelation 16, verses 3 through 4, where the second and third bowls of wrath turn the sea and all water sources into blood. So then I ask, how many cisterns was Masada reported to have? Because after the siege of Jerusalem ends, there's still yet another episode where the Romans lay siege to Masada. And that was supposed to be where the Zealots were holding up. Masada is reported to have 12 large rock-hewn cisterns, which were engineered by King Herod the Great to hold water collected from desert flash floods. These cisterns were arranged on 2 levels and had a total capacity exceeding 40,000 cubic meters, approximately 10 million gallons. They were designed to sustain over 1,000 people for up to 3 years by storing water from seasonal flash floods. A complex system of dams and channels diverted water into the cisterns, which were later emptied by workers to transport water to the summit. So unlike the temple, Masada had a good storage of water for so many people defending it. The cisterns are carved into the western cliffs, often viewed from a specialized viewpoint on the mountaintop. This, along with extensive storage, allowed the fortress to be self-sufficient. Let's see, during the siege of Masada by the Roman legions, did Masada's defenders ever run out of water? No, the defenders of Masada did not run out of water during the siege by the Roman legions. Okay, so that was just, a line of thought I was chasing to see if there was anything there, and it didn't look like there was anything there. So, Josephus did not specify the exact number of cisterns at Masada. Yeah, it's not specific. So, did Josephus list 6 zealot figures? Based on the works of Flavius Josephus, particularly the Jewish War, he does not list a simple numbered set of 6 zealot figures, but he does identify several key leaders and distinct, often competing revolutionary factions active during the First Jewish-Roman War, 66 to 70 AD. Okay, so these sometimes competing revolutionary factions and their representative leaders are supposed to all be from the First Jewish-Roman War from 66 to 70 AD. So that would be the one carried out by Vespasian and Titus, who goes by the literary mask Jesus in the Gospels. Josephus identifies these main revolutionary leaders and factions, often referring to them broadly as brigands or fanatics. or in other words, robbers or fanatics. First one, Jesus of Galilee, Judas the Galilean, cited as the founder of the fourth philosophy, or the Zealot movement, which began in 6 AD in opposition to the Roman census. Now, I don't think the number 6 uh, has any significance there, because I don't think at the time that they were counting years that way. I don't think anyone was saying, hey, we're living in year 6, because something happened 6 years ago and we don't quite yet know what, right? The next one, Menachem ben Judah, described by Josephus as the son or grandson of Judas of Galilee, who led an early phase of the revolt in 66 AD and was a leader of the Sicarii, or the Dagger Men. Again, I don't think 66 AD has any significance there, because I don't think at the time they were saying, hey, we're living in the year 66. Something happened 66 years ago. We don't know what it was, but we're counting the year this way. I could be wrong, but I don't think that's how years were counted back then. In retrospect, we identify these years by the counting on our new calendar, and that just helps us to keep everything in chronological order. Eleazar ben Yair, a relative of Menachem who escaped the slaughter of his group in Jerusalem and became the leader of the final group of defenders at Masada. Okay, so he was the leader then at Masada. Eleazar ben Simon, a prominent leader within Jerusalem, who was a key leader of the Zealot faction in 66 AD. Next, John of Gischala, a major rival to Simon Bar Giora, who commanded a significant army and led the Zealot faction in Jerusalem during the final siege. And then last, Simon Bar Giora, a powerful leader who was brought into Jerusalem and commanded the largest force of revolutionaries during the final siege. Josephus often distinguishes between the Zealots, often specifically referring to those under Eleazar ben Simon and John of Gischala, and the Sicarii, the Dagger Men, although he uses harsh language for both groups. Now let us count these figures. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So while they may not be a numbered set of 6 zealot figures, the leaders that were given for the first Jewish-Roman war that were resisting Rome number 6. There are 6 of them. So back to our 6 stone jars at Cana, Zealot in Galilee. So here we have 6 zealot leaders filled with water, but then some blood, some wine was drawn out. Could that be what this is all talking about? So then I said, in Judaism, are jars or pots or bottles ever used to symbolize human bodies or people? I think we already got a yes answer on that. And then that was about Titus and his glory. So maybe some of this is revealing about the wedding at Cana. Maybe it's all just grasping at straws. I tend to think that in line with the Caesar's Messiah thesis, that these texts are often, and this is right in line with rabbinical methods of hermeneutics or interpretation of scripture. Um, and, no doubt that the Romans practiced some of these literary methods themselves. But this sort of interpretation seems to be right in line with the Caesar's Messiah thesis. So you would expect that if this is referring to the siege of the temple, that this would be later in the Gospel of John and not in chapter 2. But it could be that Josephus may have mentioned those 6 leaders, maybe not all in one place, but maybe towards the beginning of the military campaign against the Jews, or it may have been seen as fitting to mention all 6 together, lump them all together at the place where in Josephus, where the first resistance fighter is encountered by Vespasian, Titus, and their legions. I don't know. Anyway, so this seems more in keeping with the history than this strange wedding with very strange language where the steward of the feast isn't mentioned, the bridegroom's name isn't mentioned. You're kind of wondering why Mary's doing what she's doing at the wedding, and why she's expecting Jesus to help out. So I'll stop there after test, okay.